Hey, this is Meleika of Evanston Live TV, and I am sitting here with longtime Evanston resident Lonnie Wilson. Many of you know of him. He is definitely a powerful voice in the Evanston community, and he and I have been talking over, the past couple of days, and Lonnie shared his perspective on how human value is equated in Evanston, and it was a very interesting perspective. And if any of you are on his Facebook page, he goes in. He goes in, and I mean, it's almost like reality TV watching him debate, because he is very passionate about his hometown of Evanston and very, very passionate about the people of Evanston. So, I came by and I said, Lonnie was like, let's talk. So I'm like, okay, Lonnie, let's talk. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Wilson, and let's talk about the human value here in Evanston from Lonnie Wilson's perspective. All right, so
well, what makes me think about this is if you look at how Evanston does its budget, Evanston does its policing, everything is based on a certain value system. And this value system is a narrative that I always feel should be readjusted because, and I'll use two stories to tell you how human value was driven into my own head. When I was 17, I came home after school, and my grandfather told me to rake the leaves off the grass. So I did. But while I was doing it, I raked the leaves onto a wino who was sitting in the back of my house. And Mr. Boyd, Jimmy Boyd, said he's going to tell my grandfather. So he runs in the house, and he gets my grandfather. My grandfather comes back outside and sees that I have put leaves on this old man sitting by the garbage pail. And he says, "You will respect that man because he's open."
Oh, okay, it's back.
Okay.
It's back now. So start that story over because we lost connection.
I was telling her about how human value was driven into my own head by older African-American Evanstonians. I was talking about a time when I raked the leaves in my own house at 1718 Hope Lincoln Court, and I raked the leaves on a wino who was sitting in the back by the garbage. And my grandfather came outside and said that I will respect that man because he's opened his eyes more days than I have. And then the second story I'll use is when I was working at Family Focus, I was packing boxes of food in the food pantry, and I was throwing the turkeys in the box. And Ms. Richmond, who was Robin Rue's grandmother, came downstairs and said, "You will pack those boxes with the same respect that you would give to your own family." And I never forgot that value, that human value is just judged in the wrong way. It's where you're educated at, how much money you have. That makes you important, but really, humans are important at any level. If you want to see Everson get up in arms, cut down a tree, but we've lost 5,000 African Americans between the two censuses, and not a word is said. But if you want to see Everson get mad, build a building higher than 3 floors, or cut down a tree, and they'll run there. But they will not say a word about the decimation of a section of this town. And to me, I think that's amazing. But we always want to consider ourselves the most livable city in America. Yes, for squirrels and elm trees.
So, wow, Lonnie, I've heard you have this conversation. I think when I first started the podcast,
yes, ma'am,
and I had you on the podcast, and one of the things you used to talk about was how African Americans are being moved out of Evanston.
Well, they're being priced out of here, and I mean, a whole bunch of people are being priced out. There's probably some middle class and lower class white people that are getting moved out of town. But the people I grew up with are gone. When I see your face, I think of Albert Joy and all the things he taught me as a young man. There was a core value thing in that African American community that I was given, and even in this nursing home, I still follow those rules that all people are important. There is no one set that's more important than another. And if we're going to be equitable in this town, then we have to realize that one part of this town is in distress and the other part of this town is making massive amounts of money, and we need to understand that.
Okay, what do you know, we just had the Evanston town hall. It was Haggerty's first town hall, which I think he did a great job because there was some heat and passion in that room. And he took it on and topics he didn't have all the information on. He was very transparent.
Trying to get it, right.
Yeah, he definitely was.
Well, I actually like Steve. I think Steve is going to try his best to bring some kind of equilibrium to this town. But the problem in some of our thinking is that power in this town comes from 2 or 3 places: the Chamber of Commerce, Northwestern, and the wealthy ring of this town. And when they get upset, then all of a sudden things move. But if somebody has a problem on Dodge or Brown or Hoagland, it's considered minor, and that's a problem.
Okay, the $3 million deficit that was definitely a topic at the town hall.
Well, what's
your opinion on that?
They're going to even out that city budget by passing out more tickets in the African American community, more boots, whatever they have to do to get those funds back. But you can almost bet that it will be put on the back of the least able in the town. That's what Everson does. We have people in this town who could pay that debt out of their checkbook, but they're not going to do it. We're going to pressure the people with tickets and fines and even beach tokens. We're going to figure out a way to bring that cost down on the backs of the least able in this town. And this is a pattern in Evanston. And what my problem is that what happens is you keep booting cars and towing cars and sending out the inspectors to the African American community, and they have to fix their gutters and get the mold out of their basement. Not that these aren't good things, but in the end, that pressure pushes people out of town. And I once again say every single human being I grew up with is now gone. They had to leave here. And I'm probably going to have to leave in the long run because now I'm looking for an apartment to live in the very town that I'm a 5th generation person being here, and I can't afford to live here. So, which is going to be another interesting little situation in about a year. So we'll see how it works.
What do you think the community can do, the community that's going to end up having to pay that debt? What do you think they can do? Well,
I think that Steve and some other people have tried to make the first steps towards equalizing that by giving Pat Effingham the equity director's job. They reached out, but the problem is that we still haven't examined Evanston through a true equitable lens. We talk about change, but we really don't want it. We will get upset over a 5-story building. It'll bring hundreds of people to the city. But this drop in the African American population, you don't hear anybody talking about it. I mean, me and about 3 other people talk about it, but normally that's not discussed because that community, and the crazy thing is that Evanston is really built on the backs of that impoverished area. They've always paid the fines and had the cars towed and been ticketed. The police sit on Dodge every night, and they literally invade the 5th Ward at about 11 o'clock every night. And they've been doing that. I'm 62, I don't remember a year they didn't do that. Now, I don't think that the police can solve the problem because I don't think policing is necessarily the problem. The problem is what Everson sees as valuable. Until Everson sees its African American population as of some value, it's really interesting. Most white people, this is how their entrance into the 5th Ward. They pull up when their kid is a freshman, they drop their child off at the high school, and you won't see them again till the child becomes a senior. That's all they know about the African American community in this town.
Is ETHS.
ETHS. Everything else is off the books.
So what do you think the 5th Ward is going to look like in the next 10 years?
Well, unfortunately, I understand that economic pushes will drive most of the people away from the 5th Ward because the cheapest houses in this town for sale are those in the ward that I grew up in. And unfortunately, those people are also the people who will be the first to sell their homes and move out. So, and I think that what's going to happen is Everson will be Highland Park and Highwood. It just won't have an African American population. because we don't have, the connections that the Mexican, Latin, Brown brothers have. They have the Bank of Mexico and other places they can find funding to buy homes. If we try to buy a home, we got to go to First Bank, which if you don't have a credit score of damn near 750 or 780, you might as well not walk in there. So it's just a stacked deck, and I just don't understand why we haven't, after all these years, the one thing we'll talk about, we'll have a massive march on City Hall because a kid gets snatched on a bicycle downtown. But as these people lose their homes over and over and over again, year after year after year, nobody says anything. They have an African-American picnic, Evanston picnic in Atlanta and in LA. That's where the people leave here to go try to find something. So we literally had a brain drain. Very funny story. My daughter's an Everson policeman. I tried my best to make my daughter buy a house in this town. And this is what she told me. She said, Dad, I'm not going to buy a garage on Brown for $500,000 so you can hold on to your legacy. It's just, this is my money. I have to spend it in the best. So she moved to Zion. And I don't blame her. I'm not mad at her. But what happens to the true affordability? And I'm not talking about some apartment building. How do African Americans hold on to their property? How do they continue to live here? How do they pass it down to the next generation? I mean, I watched my grandfather work 2 whole jobs. He worked at the post office for 8 hours, and then he went and was a construction manager for another 8 hours to buy a house on Holden Court that now my own daughter couldn't afford to be in. It's madness.
So, do you know families right now that are in jeopardy of losing their
I
property
know
right now?
several, yes.
And what are they doing?
Well, 2 things happen. Well, there's nothing they can do. They're going from paycheck to paycheck trying to survive. That's what you do living here in Evanston. It's always been that way. The problem is that we've got all this, we've built this big pot of money from these contractors. You got all these affordable housing dollars sitting up there, but no one has said, well, let's try to get a low-cost loan situation for these people to save their homes. But if we were interested in that, we'd have been done it. But we're 5,000 families less now. When you start out with like 18 to 20,000 people, 5,000 people, that's a quarter of the people that were here are gone. And that's a scary thought. Evanston will not have this diverse thing they keep screaming about. They have their best PR story about a diverse community in the world, but action does not follow all the words. We do a lot of talking in Evanston. We love to talk about diversity, but we don't really foster the strength of diversity.
So the wards that are being impacted the most.
The 5th, the 2nd, parts of the 8th.
Is there something that the alderman can do to bring people together to put money, like the Evanston, you all were talking about the Evanston Collective and, helping people to save
Well, we were also trying to teach them how to invest money. There needs to be a true financial literacy understanding in the African American community in a big way. Because what we don't understand is that wealth in America is built through home ownership. And when we lose our homes, when I couldn't give my daughter a home, I started her in a worse spot than I started myself. My mother left me something. I was unable to leave my daughter something. So she started from ground zero. And we need to stop that as a community. And I'm not blaming that on Everson, but I think that the mechanisms to help that need to be fostered and built and created. And if we're not going to do it, then let's stop screaming about diversity and 5-star town, because this ain't a 5-star town where I come from. This is more like a 2.5-star town. We just need to say the truth to each other, because Evanston's not worried about, the only people that Evanston ever gets, here you have the city of Evanston with a $3 million deficit, and its largest landowner has a $7 billion public endowment. How does that work? If Evanston was a body and Northwestern was a leech, Northwestern has sucked the blood out of Evanston so long that Evanston's going to die and Northwestern's going to be prosperous. And we need to rethink those arrangements because it's unhealthy.
Do you think the city of Evanston is afraid to go up against a mountain like
I think what they've done is the 2 or 3 legal actions that they did take, they got their butts kicked, and they figure like, we'll be quiet now. So what Northwestern does is out of $7 million, they take $1 million and throw it at Evanston, and the Evanston government gets really happy because Northwestern paid for a street. But if I got $7 billion and I give you $1 million, that's like me pulling out my pocket $100 and handing you $1. It's not really, it makes no difference. Northwestern could pay into a fund very easily, and it wouldn't even hurt them. We're not talking about a strain, we're just talking about a want to do something. I'm not asking them to pay for all that property, they couldn't do it. But they've got so much money that they're talking about building out onto the lake. When you can have enough money to build buildings on top of water, you got a lot of money. And that money should be used for the very people that it's used over hundreds of years to lean on. That African American community has been there. It's probably the oldest community in this town, but nobody's interested in it. I guess people get tired of me screaming about it, but it's what made me, it created me, and I got such a respect and love for it that I would hate to see it go, but if nothing happens, if they don't move drastically to make those changes, it will disappear.
You're getting a lot of feedback right now. Gene Threats says, when I visited Evanston home and went to my old neighborhood, Foster and Ridge, and my first thought was, I know y'all getting them some of this money.
Well, Gene, I'm glad that you at least dream like that, but the money in Everson keeps flowing in the same circles. And unless you're in that circle, you don't make it. Now, I'm not mad at some things, but I've had a real education. And I'll use YOU as an example. YOU got a building given to them from the Pritzkers. They got another $15 million, supposedly, to intervene into the difficulty of African American young life. But I see people walking up and down in front of that masterful building that can't even go in there. So how do you keep showing pictures of little, untogether black people to raise all this money, and really the only people you're paying is the middleman? They didn't pay the black community; they paid the shepherds of that money, which is it's a poverty pimping game, which we need to stop doing. We need to. Can you imagine if you took $15 million and directly invested it in African Americans in that little corner of town? What would happen? It would change overnight. But no, we want to build massive buildings to white power that's supposed to help us. We always need a middleman. There's black genius in our area. You could put that money in several different pots, and there's people who know how to make that money work. But we don't ask black people how to help black people. We count on white people paternalistically saving us.
Who are these black people?
There's many of them. I mean, if you just
Can
think
you name them?
I can name them. I think Ms. Holmes is definitely one. I think people like Tanya, who's on the school board, has shown brilliance. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of people with brilliance. We just don't count on that brilliance. And once again, it's back to the value of who has the skill set. But if I was trying to save white Everson, I would definitely go to white Everson and ask them, how can I help you? I wouldn't tell them how to do it, I'd ask them. But we don't get the same, type of nod. There's a wonderful machine in this town, from the Y to the YOU to, even Family Focus in its own way. These groups know how to raise dollars to feed themselves. They're not feeding African American Evanston. That's just the poster child. They hold up the poster of all these. You let a little kid get shot tonight, and there'll be 1 million people running around talking about why we should deal with the gun problem. The gun problem has foundational issues. Poverty is the foundational issue of violence. And until we get to this thought, but I'm not Dr. Lon. I got raised on Church Street. I went to Church Street University. So supposedly I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't have NU tapped to my butt. But I've been living long enough to know that there are ways that we can make a difference here.
Gene Threat says, you already said it, you, the black peoples, have to come together to save communities.
And she's dead right. It has to be us. And one of the problems that I blame on my elders is when this community was created, we had a black doctor, we had a black hospital, we educated our own kids. And then, unfortunately, some of those that are my own elders thought that integration was going to be some kind of wonderful panacea, and what it turned out to be was the death of the strength of the community itself, because there were carpenters and electricians and people doing the work amongst themselves. And then we counted on another system to help us, and we sank. Because when my grandfather was a kid, I think about Mr. Thomas, who was Gary Thomas's father. He had a tuck pointing business my entire life. And I watched this man get up every day, go to work, tuck point all around Evanston, and do a great job.
Richard Reed says, Lonnie, thank you for our great Evanston history. I have been gone for a long time.
Well, I'm sorry that you left, Mr. Reed, because I know how powerful a musician you are, and I wish we had stayed.
So you, like in Chicago, you will hear people talk about the black wealthy, high-profile figures, how if they put their monies together, we can build
It's the
schools
exact
in
same
Chicago.
thing in Evanston.
So who are the wealthy black
I don't
in
want to
Evanston?
name who they are, but I will say in our own research in the Everson Collective, we kind of identified about 37 people who might be worth in assets. Now, understand, we don't have liquid money.
Okay.
Black folks don't have liquid money. Their money's tied in their house or their car or their retirement.
Investments.
Right. So we can't just grab money. So that's the difference. In Evanston, there are people who have liquid money. Black Evanston doesn't have that. So what we would have to do is start the process to thinking about that, and I think it's about time. Because no one's going to save us. They're not going to save us. Matter of fact, they don't even care. The only thing that white Everson wants to say is that their child had a diversified environment as he grew up. But you can do that with 2 or 3 brown folks and 1 black guy. That's a diversified raising.
I would like to know who these wealthy black people are in Evanston.
Well, I can't put people's names out like that, but I can tell you here and now, there are more than 30 actual African-American millionaires living in this town. Now, the problem is they don't trust themselves. Now, you got to understand that the narrative of black intellect has been so reduced that they themselves believe that investing the money in another black person is a problem. So we've got a mental illness that we've got to overcome, which will probably have to be dealt with in a whole different way. So the problem is really, really tangled up. So, but we have no problem. You want to see us get together? If we want to start a basketball league, we'll start it tomorrow. But we won't save ourselves, which says something about us.
It would be interesting if I know you're not going to call them out right now on camera, but if we could get them all together in a room and
it would be a powerful move.
Okay.
And maybe one day we'll try to do that.
Try.
Some of them are in my own family, so they know what I'm talking about.
Oh.
Right. So these people have made money over the years.
So when you've gone and talked to them about what's happening in the Fifth Ward and 5,000 black families have moved out, what do they say? What's their response?
There's several things they say. One is that I'm going to insulate and take care of my own family, my own situation, which I understand, but I think that I have a little different bend on the situation because I consider myself a product of a community. They consider themselves products of themselves. So there's a little different mindset. I realize that I am Jimmy Boyd and Mr. Moppins and Terry Brown's father. I saw these men working their whole entire life, and they created something inside of me that I don't think everybody has. I don't even expect everybody to have it. But what I do know is if we don't make drastic steps in the next 5 to 7 years, there's going to be such a reduction that we can never recover. There won't be a black Evanston. It'll be a slightly less cultured Latin Evanston, yes, because they still have some collectiveness, and I'm proud of them. I'm not trying to say that there's bad. That is a very powerful thing. What I always tell every Mexican person I ever see is, don't lose your culture, because the minute you get your culture whitewashed in this country, you become a little bit insane, and that's what's happened to Black Evanston. We were so interested in being part of the bigger Evanston that we lost our own identity. Because if you look at the Butler family and these people who first came here, they didn't ask anybody for anything. They got together and built houses, and even when they moved houses some of them moved to the lake, and there's a massive move of houses came from that end of town all the way even from Wilmette, they moved them into the Fifth Ward because a black person couldn't live among the supposedly great white folks. You know, one of the things that's always struck me is I read Mary Barr's book, When Friends Disappear, and there's a section in there where she talks about a travel agent talking about the wonders of Evanston, that Evanston had such a beautiful way of separating the classes that it was to be world renowned. It was just a wonderful way that Evanston allowed its classes to be so separated without any kind of strife. And I always thought that was amazing, because that's really what Evanston is. I call it the lie by the lake, because what it really is a town that screams all over the world how great it is, but when you live in it and you watch what it doesn't fit its commercial.
So if we got all of these 37 affluent African Americans, I like to say black, but you know,
okay,
that's right. Black families together, and you're saying that they have this mentality, then how would we start that conversation?
I think you would need a very powerful lightning rod type person, like, I don't know, Ira Cruthers or somebody, to explain to them that, and until we break out of this cultural dislike of ourselves, that we can't work together. We need to find a way to work together. And unfortunately, some of the very people who've made it in this town forgot how they started. I'm old enough to have seen, people in this town in a whole different light. Because he probably won't get mad at me, but I remember when Hecky had a process and a do-rag around his head. That's how old I am. I remember when he used to sing Street Corner Harmony. But not to say that he's forgotten that, because he's also created the Forrest E Foundation. He's trying to fight back, but we just haven't done it collectively. And that's going to take the effort. Now, who puts that together, I don't know. Because depending on who you talk to, I'm viewed in several different lights. Because I spend a lot of time in the street, my more affluent relatives think, I'm kind of the street guy. But, I have just as much sense as those who went off to college. It's just that I say my thing in a little different way. And I really don't want to change. I think that I learned in the pool room in Evanston. I think it was a great education. I wouldn't take it back for this world. Being trained by people like Blackjack and Cooper and, Larry Perry and, the Brammer family. I learned so much from them people. And I owe those people that I keep this fight going. And everywhere I can, I'm going to scream this same story over and over and over again. Because if it dies, we can never rebuild it. And what's crazy is when you look at how it was built, the people who built African American Evanston did it with far less, and they did it in about 50, maybe 75 years. So to say that we can't do it is not true. Because if you look at the people who came here running from South Carolina and Mississippi, they moved into this little corner, this little swampy corner, and built a community. They ended up building a hospital. They did a lot of really powerful things. But the young African Americans don't know that story. I'm the last generation who knows that story, and I'm 62 years old. The average guy standing on Emerson, black guy standing on Emerson, has no idea of the history of these people. And I think Dino does a good job of trying to keep that history alive, and I think that we need to find a way to, I don't care if we make Black Everson comic books, we have to find a way to get our young to understand the sacrifice that these people gave up to get them where they are. Because they look at it as like somebody owes them something. Nobody owes you anything. You have to go out and take it, what you want. And my problem with Everson proper is that it shows this light, like there's this wonderful, healthy African-American community in the corner, and we all help to keep that going, and that's not true. The only thing that White Everson helps to keep going is White Evanston, unfortunately, and they do a great job of it. But they also have the networks and the resources to do these things. And even our leadership, now we've got a little younger leadership who's trying to connect to these young people, but we don't even listen to young people. We take our own old wounds and try to. People my age shouldn't even be involved in the planning. Maybe I can plant the seed, but young people like you and other young people need to take this on and run with it. First of all, I can't run no more. Them days is over.
Well, one, I'm glad you said I'm still young.
You are.
Thank you. But then we got some planning.
We got some planning and some work to do.
Yes, we do. Wow. Jean Threat said that her father helped build Northwestern, but he couldn't afford to retire there. Right. And we were the only black family on our street.
I remember I stopped by University Place and waved at you a lot of times.
All right, if anyone else has any more questions for Lonnie, I mean, this man knows Evanston probably better than anybody that I know.
I'll tell a story. I never left this town for more than 2 weeks in my entire life. I went to visit my aunt in San Antonio about 3 times when I was 13, 14, and 15. I've never left this town. If I don't know anything, I know Evanston.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Well, so the mission is we got to keep the history alive here.
Yes, we do.
Evanston.
I think we need to fund Dino's projects. We need to get over there and see what he's collected. We need to get those archives talked about. We need to listen to his voice. We need to listen to how they did it in the first place. And then we just emulate the same story. Dr. Hill, I remember when I'm a kid going to Dr. Hill at Community Hospital, and the most powerful thing in the world as a young black man to have this woman who was an African-American woman holding a stethoscope on me as a little boy. It was just so powerful to see my own be doctors. I thought it changed who I am.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lonnie. Is there anything else you want to get out there?
Well, I also want to get, and I'm going to say this to the African-American church in the town, because if there's one institution that can pull this together, it could be the black church. If the black church would stop fighting each other like gang members and get to the business of saving this town.
Really? Are they fighting like gang members?
Well, you got to remember that church is about money. So every church wants to have its population grow. I understand that. But the problem is they're also supposed to be led by God. And if you're led by God, we need to get away from the who's the great preacher and get to the point of saving this town.
Do you think if the churches came together that they could save the Fifth Ward?
I do believe that.
Okay.
I believe that it could ferment in the churches, because the one place you can find every African American in Evanston on Sunday, you can find them in one place. There's no other institution that can do that. We're not all going to be at school. But we all going to be at church.
So you believe that they have the endowment, if they all came together?
It's there. They could save it tomorrow, yes.
They could save it tomorrow.
But if you look at, there used to be an African American Ministers Alliance, and I think they've tried to rebuild it. But, there were leaders in the black church. Michael Neighbors has taken on that mantle and really ran in a beautiful way. But I grew up with Reverend Norwood, and I saw the power of what an African-American preacher could really get done. And I hate to say it, I see some remnants in Michael Neighbors, but I've seen it nowhere else in the last 30 years.
Has there ever been, because you've lived here all your life, has there ever been a meeting of all the black ministers in Evanston?
Probably so. I wasn't invited, because I didn't spend too much time in church.
Well, when people started noticing that black families could no longer afford to stay here. What has there
One
been
of the things,
a meeting?
this is like a Chinese drip torture. You got to understand that this is happening so slowly and so meticulously that nobody even notices it. You know, I once said that if all the cars they towed out of the Fifth Ward, if they had took that tonnage of the money they got from the cars they towed and ticketed and booted in the Fifth Ward and returned that money back to the African American community, we could almost fund our own stuff just from the amount of metal they've dragged in from that little corner. Because when they have a snow emergency, white Everson can pull into their driveway. There's only one place in Evanston that all the cars are going to be parked on the street, and that's African American Evanston, because we don't own the driveway, we don't have the property. So when you come down the street, a snow emergency goes off, the amount of money that's pulled from that little corner of town is amazing. But we don't talk about that because that's an equity question, and you have to look at it from an equity lens. And white Everson doesn't want to do that because they think they're fair. They hear the siren. They don't realize that this is having an economic difference on a certain section of town. But that siren goes off every time it's a couple inches, and it's been going off since I was a little boy.
Okay, so there's definitely needs to be some more conversations had when we turn this camera off.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Lonnie. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the
The idea that a young sister is out here with her camera getting these stories is important to me. I'm really proud of her.
Oh, thank you, Lonnie. Thank you very, very
Kicking
much.
ass. Well, I'm not supposed to say that, right?
Yeah, I'm on a mission. I am on a mission. But thank you so much.
No problem.